think the first thing we all want to see is a demo of the tool, if you could do that.
Okay, let me share my screen. Our main product, though, is an API for developers. We send them code, and they run a locally hosted API. And so it's JSON in and JSON out. That's a message structure in and out. So our main product doesn't even have a look or feel. It's just a tool. It's a algorithm that makes, or a function call, I should say, that makes entity resolution easy. We built a simple little desktop app over it so you could also demonstrate it. So the app you're going to see it just sits on top of it. You can download this app for free, by the way.
Sure.
Let's share it. It's on our website. You have projects, and one of my projects is PPP data. And inside of my PPP data project, I've been loading lots of different files for experiments because I've been looking at how the Paycheck Protection Program, there's been a lot of reports of fraud around that. And so I loaded the PPP data, and it finds 4,000 duplicates, 130 possible duplicates, and 68,000 things that aren't the same, but they're connected, like they share an address. Many of these are probably quite legit. CHAH Holdings Inc. versus LLC. If it's two different physical businesses, like two different licenses, you can get two different loans. But, without going and doing any research, it'd be difficult to know which ones of these were inappropriate duplicates. I'm going to click show all columns. It's going to show a few more things, and especially out on the right here. And I don't know anything about this, but like this one here is GAGB, LLC, and this is GAGB LLC. Probably just fine, but you have to figure out, this would be one of the ones somebody will look at someday. They got, according to this data, which we downloaded off of the website, they got two different loans. Maybe those are two totally legit loans. Again, it would take some analysts to look at. But anyway, that's what it does. And then you can combine it with other data. So here I'll click that, and I've combined it with Department of Labor compliance actions. And here it says there's 20,000 connections between loans and compliance actions. Nothing's illegal about PPP loans to people that have had labor compliance actions. But this entity here has, according to that freely downloadable file from the Department of Labor, 11 compliance violations. So anyway, so what I do for fun is go and, download lots of different public data sources, and without any work, do entity resolution, match these companies to these, within and across data sources. Usually that's very hard because one will say incorporated, one will say Inc., the other one doesn't say Inc. The addresses are super messy. And so our technology just makes that really easy for programmers so they can just work on other stuff that's more interesting. Likewise, it's so hard to do fuzzy matching on, business and people data. So there's your demo.
Nice.
Yeah.
So for everyone who just joined, feel free to interrupt at any time and ask any questions you have. Otherwise, I'll just be going through the list of questions that were submitted ahead of time. All right, so one thing people are interested in hearing about is you mentioned, I think on Medium, that you currently living a nomadic lifestyle. So what are 3 pros and 3 cons?
That was very true last year, but COVID, it makes it not so simple. So I'm not as nomadic. I still don't own stuff. Well, I still own this boat, but other than that, I got rid of everything I own down to under 180 pounds, including my racing bike. Pros and cons. The pros are I don't have stuff that's like under the bed that'll never be used in the rest of my life. It's just wasting space, or stuff that needs repair for no purpose because I don't use it and uses extra carbon. I felt lighter when I got rid of all my stuff. So those are like some pros. And then some cons. You do forget how much you associate yourself with your things and a place. Like for 2 years, I had no place that I would think of as home. and no, no furniture, like literally just a suitcase. Last year I spent a different, I changed beds on average every 2 days, all year last year. Yeah, so it was a little destabilizing to not have a place or stuff. That's the only 2 cons I can think of. I don't think I threw away anything that I missed. There's that thing called, the magic art of tidying up, where you're supposed to touch stuff and see if it gives you joy. I did that in the extreme. Like, I just touched all my stuff and I only kept things like I went, oh yeah, I gotta have that. And that means I also got rid of like all my Ironman medals. Just gone. They're just gonna live under my bed the rest of my life anyway.
It was more the achievement of winning than the actual prize that you cared about, or the experience.
Well, I wasn't winning. They give you a medal just finishing. That's
okay.
But just the idea of having done them is all I need. I don't need a piece of physical material that I can hang on a wall to prove I did something.
For sure. Yeah, I think more people are gonna start moving towards nomadic lifestyles, especially because of things like Airbnb and the gig economy. So
kind of nice. The other negative about it is you don't have resilience. Like, I don't know, if the internet goes down and you don't own a car or nothing and you can't find an Uber, you're kind of trapped. People with houses have extra food left over. Like, somebody goes, hey man, we're gonna go, we have like 1 week of food. I'm like, I don't have any food anywhere. So that's another weakness of nomadic lifestyle, is you don't have reserves.
for sure. That's a good point. I mean, considering the current situation, I think a lot more people are concerned about that.
Yeah, and who knows, who would guess a pandemic hits.
Yeah. So you mentioned Ironman earlier. So what are some lessons you've learned from your competitions in the Ironman that you've applied to entrepreneurship and vice versa?
Another athlete once said, if you give up, there's no chance luck will happen. I thought that was a pretty powerful statement. Ironman's also just really about persistence and willing to just keep pushing. And if there's any one thing that it takes to be an entrepreneur, is you just have to have a lot of energy, and you just have to keep pursuing and keep adapting to what's in front of you. Because if it was easy, everybody would have done it. Everybody. Yeah. There you go. Those are my big tips from Ironman.
Nice. So how much of persistence is like an inborn quality versus how much do you think it's developed?
I don't know. For me, it's not. I picked things in life to do that I love doing. So my life's a hobby, my work's a hobby, Ironmans are a hobby. I just kind of do things that are hobbies, so it's easy for me to do them a lot. And I'm a very, I don't know, it's not a great thing, but I'm an obsessive type. Like, I like to pick things I like, and then I do them a lot. So I'm very careful about things that I pick, because then I just. I had to give drugs when I was 21. I was like, oh man, these are going to kill me. Done.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do what you love. I think it's hard to motivate yourself to do something that you hate unless you're an exceptionally strong-willed person. But so in the past, you mentioned a lot of useful potential applications of entity resolution. So what are the most exciting applications you foresee, and what domains is Senzing planning to expand to?
We let everybody use it, so no matter what domain they're in, and it's sometimes interesting to find out how people are using it. One nonprofit's using it to help make sure kids that get access to lunches normally at schools, but they can't go to school now, so there's no free breakfast or lunch, and using Senzing to help make sure those kids can be located and given meal credits or food stamps so they can eat. Like, I didn't think of that. That's an exciting use case. Public use case is our work in voter registration. Over half the country's voter registration runs on a Senzing system, and we're excited about that. It was featured in the New York Times. A lot of people move, and then people forget to unregister. So, you know, let's say you lived in Colorado, registered to vote. A few years later, you moved to Oregon, but almost nobody remembers to go back to Colorado and go, hey, I moved, take me off. So they're still on the voter roll in Colorado, not that they're voting. It doesn't look right. Like if you look at the roll, there's just a bunch of people that don't live in the state anymore. And so our software is used to find those so that the states can reach out to those people and ask them if they intended to, you know, forgot to unregister, so they can unregister them. We're really excited because it helps advance democracy. It helps improve confidence in the election rolls.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Very relevant for the upcoming one, especially given that it's probably going to be like mail-in and there's concerns about like fraud or overcounting or whatever. So
yeah, I also like bad guy hunting missions where people use our software to find clever bad people that either are trying to cause harm, whether it's human trafficking, whether it's child pornography, whether it's terrorism, whether it's like, you know, the ivory tusk sale and movement of ivory tusks. It's exciting when we get used in missions where there's people, you know, doing very bad things.
is there any concern about this, a very hypothetical, like bad guys getting access to the Senzing API and trying to reverse engineer it to figure out ways around it?
Yeah, there's always a risk of that, but the cost and effort to stop that exceeds, it would be cops and robbers. You do something, they would do something, you do something, they do something. And really anybody can just download it. So if you make it so not anybody can download it, then some student at some university you never heard of will ask to download it. You'll let them, but that was really just the bad guy. So, and we don't run it, we don't host it. So it'd be different if we hosted people's data and we had the API, you know, we were running it and people's data came to us. In theory, you could maybe prevent people from trying to reverse engineer it better, but we don't want people's data. And so when people download our software, it's their, they just run it locally. So we don't have any really control over it. So in some regards, we're kind of like a pencil. Like most people use pencils for good things, but some people use pencils to write, like, I don't know, their to-do list against their arch enemy, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
Good point. So one thing a lot of students are interested in knowing is if Senzing is hiring, and if so, what kind of qualifications would you like to see?
We're not hiring now. My goal is to grow a big company and hire and not have thousands of people. So I'm trying to build a company that is highly efficient. We do hire at times. Our core engine is in C++. The open source that sits around it is in Java and Python. We use JSON, so that's important. We use a SQL database, so knowing SQL is a good thing. Other skill sets. We're doing a lot of work around Docker, Kubernetes, queuing mechanisms like Amazon's SQS or RabbitMQ or Kafka. Knowledge in these open source things, those and things like OpenShift and REST services, those are all really great skill sets. Probably our next hire is somebody that can help us advance our open source movement. So if you were to look at our GitHub, the Senzing GitHub, and you'll see 100 projects there, it would be helping us build the next 100 or add to those 100. That's probably our next hire, maybe later this year, maybe next.
What's the value you see, like the value you see in like Senzing doing open source projects?
Well, first of all, we're open source inside out. We have a big open source strategy, but it's opposite of most everybody else's. Most open source projects, they take the core thing and make it open source. Then they take the important things that you need: auditability, restartability, redundancy, running, parallel ones. So if one goes down, the other one stays up. High availability. They take all those things that like a real business has to have, and then make those private. And then you have to pay people to get the open source running and to get access to the private parts. And we're 100% opposite. Our core is really tiny and very light. It's like a link library, so you can just compile it in. It's configurable and extensible, so it's not black box. And then and it does everything. Every single feature's in it. Anybody on this call could just download the whole API or download that desktop app, which comes with the API, and it's got every single feature in it. And then what we've done is everything around it that make it easier to use. The things that allow it to run in Docker and Kubernetes, our REST server, connectors, so you can connect it to a graph database. All of that is open source under Apache 2 licenses. And all of our consulting is, or not consulting, but all of our technical services are free. Because open source companies are making their money on the extra parts that are closed and services. And we want ours to be so easy, it doesn't require services. So that's our strategy. And so far we think it's really a good fit for the market. And our market is our users and developers. They're people that they want to solve entity resolution easy, so they can get on to do other stuff.
For sure. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. You also have a subscription-based service for, so how does that fit in with the open source? Is open source kind of a lesser version, or?
No, the open source, the free version is 100,000 records. It's free for everybody. It's the whole thing. But if somebody has 1 million records, they pay us $4,000 a year. And if somebody has 10 million records, they pay us $40K a year. And so they buy it as a subscription service. So the core has a license file that comes with it that just controls how many records you've fed it. You can give it as many queries as you want, but in terms of feeding it records and having it remember the records and the resolved graph, who's who, who's related to who, that's how we charge. And if they end up with 100 million records, it's more money. If they end up with 500 million records, it's more money. And if they get more than 1 billion records, we're like, okay, all you can eat. So it's one price. Yeah.
Interesting. Have there ever been customers with that many records?
Over and over and over and over. They're all over the place.
For sure.
Hundreds and hundreds. Thousands.
Yeah. What's the most interesting story you've had that you could share from like a customer using your product? I remember you talked about like a casino one time, but anything like that, or?
I'll tell you one story. It's the prior version. It's called Identity Insight, but it's my team and I built it. It's entity resolution, but it's my favorite story. It got implemented at MoneyGram in 2008, something like that. The very next day, their fraud complaints dropped 72%. But more interestingly, so MoneyGram's that service where you can send money back home. So mom and dad in the Philippines, somebody's living here or somewhere else, and they're just sending money to mom and dad, and they go pick it up at a 7-Eleven. Just a money wire service. Our software, that software called Identity Insight, recommends to MoneyGram to stop a transaction. There's this 100-year-old grandmother. She's trying to send $2,500 to her grandson, and MoneyGram analytics with my software in it says to the 100-year-old grandma, we don't think we should send it, it's fraud. And she goes, no, I talked to him. This is my time of need. Like, I need you to send the money. So you've got a human now, the grandma, so sure. Now, if they would have sent the money after the grandma said, please send it, it definitely would have been MoneyGram's problem. It would have been the grandma's problem. But they were so confident in the decision from entity resolution about what was matching. And even though the grandma said, this is my time of need, and was angry, you must send the money, they still didn't send it. She calls back 3 days later in tears, thanking them. I kind of got this kind of feeling like, wow, like machines are arguing with humans and winning. In 2007. That's a cool story. That story became public in a use case study that floats around out there. But that's exciting. I think that's exciting.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Was it she sending it to the wrong person?
It was a scam. She hadn't talked to her grandson in the longest time, and he goes, Mama, I'm over here, I love to travel, and I'm over here, blah, and I've got really in big trouble, and I'm whatever the story was. And so she goes down to MoneyGram and goes to wire $2,500. It was a lot of money to her, and my software helped them stop it, and then helped them be so sure they overruled her anger and demands. They wouldn't have had to apologize. They wouldn't have lost any money because she was so sure. Anyway, that's a good story.
Yeah, that was a good story. But I bet there are like, how many times does that happen versus like the other way, like the machine is really sure but it's wrong?
You know, there's definitely cases of that, and there's also cases where humans overrule the machine. There's a case where the it's called a TCAS. I think it's a collision avoidance system for airplanes, and it tells the air controller, you know, they're going to collide. They go, no, it's not, and it goes, they're going to collide, and they're like, no, they're not, and then they collide. Like they decided to overrule the computer. But there's other cases where the computers are just outright wrong. There's some cases I've seen recently in the news where people are being incorrectly matched. So when they go to apply for rent somewhere, they go, we're not going to let you rent. You have a horrible renter history. They go, what do you mean I have a horrible renter history? Because their record got matched to the wrong person. That's a false positive. There's consequences of that. We've been building a lot of privacy by design features into ours, and one of those is favoring the false negative. So we only put things together like if we're really sure.
Yeah, that's a good strategy, especially for the use cases you were talking about. I'm just curious, like, do you have a vision for Senzing? Like in 10 years, like how will Senzing have made the world a different place?
You'd be surprised how many companies struggle with duplicates. They've got 6 customers they think are 6 different customers, but it's really one. The amount of waste in terms of communicating with them and giving them good service, the extra cost it takes to service 3 customers when it's really one. We see fraudsters getting away with, like, you'll see a fraudster show up at a bank in Hong Kong and they catch them for money laundering and kick them out. And then because they don't do good entity resolution, the exact same fraudster turns around, shows up in India with a different passport and 1 letter different in their last name, and the bank just can't see them. So now you're doing business with a money launderer again. So I think by making entity resolution just easy for everybody, I think it literally sits at the center of all the customer systems, fraud systems, healthcare systems when you're doing patient record matching. It's just everywhere. And so when it's easy for everybody and affordable, because we're decided to charge 10x less than everybody else, have the best product, it's much faster to implement and 10 times less expensive. We think whether it's banks or healthcare or national security, we think is going to make people have better outcomes, spend less money, be more efficient, have better products.
Yeah, it's like that 0 to 1 advantage Peter Thiel said. He's like, you need to be at least 10 times better than the competition or something.
That's right. I didn't read the whole book. I skipped 2 chapters, but that's the most chapters I've read in a book in a decade. Embarrassingly. But yeah, that's when people ask me for a recommendation of a book to read, I don't have a lot of reference points since it's the only one I've even looked at. But man, so much of that book resonated.
Yeah, Peter Thiel is a very interesting thinker for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, the other thing he said in that book is, you know, the companies that aren't monopolies go, hey, we're the only one, and they talk like a monopoly. And then the companies that are actually monopolies are in there out testifying with Congress out, we are not the monopoly you're looking for.
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty funny. But you need really high margins. Another big point he had is you need really high margins so you can keep innovating. As soon as you're in a highly competitive business where the margins just get smaller and smaller, it just gets harder and harder to make the deep R&D investments.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So since there are like a lot of companies right now suffering from entity resolution issues, like one example I think you mentioned was like you go to a hotel and they have you under 3 different accounts. How soon do you think like issues like that will be resolved using systems like yours?
Yesterday. I can't believe they're still working on that. It's now so easy. Oh man. I go to one hotel, they go, Okay, there's three, which loyalty club are you? Which one are you? Because you have, there's three Jeff Jonases. There's one at this PO box in Vegas. I'm like, that's me. there's one at this address. I go, that's me. They have three of me. So I've got some points here, I got some points here, and I got some points there. I'm like, hey, can you put all those points together? Like, you got to call corporate. It's a process. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. They think I'm three mediocre customers. Losers.
So is it just that these companies are slow to innovate, or like what's like the lag given that the technology is there already?
Well, to tell you the truth, entity resolution is hard. There are companies that have 20 full-time people working on it, 50, 100. I know some companies that have 100 people working on it full-time. I'm not kidding. I know a few like that. And because it's been hard, everybody just struggles with it and they do as best they can. And so that's what we're fixing. So, my goal for Senzing is in 5 years, it's like, putting credit cards on websites used to be really hard. And then Stripe came out with 7 lines of code. You can add credit cards to your own web page. Like that. I added Stripe to my web page in less than 30 minutes. So we're trying to do that for entity resolution. So I don't know, be a few more years before everybody knows about us, but we're working on it, man. Tell them all.
Yeah, for sure. If I ever run into that issue, I'll be like, hey, you guys should check out this service.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think businesses like that, like Stripe, what Senzing is doing, basically where like a bunch of companies are hiring people to do the exact same thing, or like great opportunities for like an outside company to provide that service. So
yeah, the number one trick is to just make it so easy that it's a no-brainer. Like Stripe is just so easy. It's not hard. So companies that take complicated tasks for programmers and make it easy are the class of company that we are. But that's like why Gmail takes off. It's just so easy. That's why Google did so well. It's just the easiest search of all. Yeah.
Goes into specialization versus doing things in-house. I mean, one thing that I've noticed is like companies like, so for example, like these are just 2 examples, but like Tesla and SpaceX are able to create like such an advantage for themselves because they do a lot of things in-house cheaper than sourcing from competitors. But at the same time, it's also important to outsource to other companies that are more specialized. So how do you know like when to draw that balance?
That's a great question. I don't know, but I do know, wherever that line would be drawn, entity resolution is a no-brainer because the amount of time it takes to do good matching, people just underestimate it. It might have to do with what's the quality. Is the capability that you need already good enough, and is it at a price point that's then less than you to build it? I'm going to make that up. I'm going to say that one way to test that is the product good enough, and is it less expensive than if we did it? And why would you use anything else?
Yeah, it's a good rule of thumb.
Right? I think that might be a good rule of thumb.
For sure. Okay, this was another question that was submitted. This is what Eric asked.
What are some qualities that separate successful and unsuccessful entrepreneurs? That's interesting. Boy, that's pretty broad because you can be an entrepreneurial farmer, but maybe this is related to tech, right? I should probably process this as tech. Let me read the second question. I want to take you and your team to come up with a Senzing and train your ML model. Let me take that first. Okay, yeah, tech. Current popular machine learning, neural nets, convolutional neural nets, they're all batch. we need real time. They all require an enormous amount of training data, and most companies don't even have that much training data. They're very brittle. You train them on one thing and you add 5 records from Indonesia that never existed in the data set and it goes crazy. We invented our own real-time machine learning. And when I say machine learning, I don't mean neural net. I mean using new observations to improve its algorithm. Like as new data shows up, it learns from experience, and then it makes better decisions going forward, but it goes backwards in real time and fixes earlier things. So an example would be, you think 2 people are one person, but 1 billion records later, there's a record shows up, and it's like the evidence to the human eye even, that means the 2 records weren't one person. It's a father and a son. It's a junior and a senior. In real time, being able to let new things you observe look backwards and reverse earlier assertions is one part of our real-time learning. Another part is finding statistical anomalies, like passports are usually a great way to identify somebody. If somebody's got the same name in the same passport, you're good to go. But what if the name is, if the name is Mark, even the name Mark Smith, if the name is Mark Smith and the passport is the passport, that's a great way. But what if the name's Mark Smith and the passport is 1111111? Somebody just put that in. America's pretty big, man. There's probably more than one Mark Smith that's got a passport number of a lazy operator of all ones. And so Senzing in real time knows how many people have each passport. So there's a point where it's like, are you telling me 5 different people all have the same passport? Then it realizes that passport number is not very good. And then it learns and it doesn't treat that passport the same way as it treats others going forward, and goes backwards to fix the past. So anyway, so we're doing a totally unique style of real-time learning that is suitable for entity resolution, that does not require you ever have to retrain, retrain, and reload a database. So that's my answer to that. What are some of the qualities that separate successful and unsuccessful? You know, I don't know. My first company, I started when I was 17, and I bankrupted that company at 20 years old. I had 20 people working for me. I ended up $200,000 in debt, and I went bankrupt. So I've been on the unsuccessful side. I would say I really didn't have a repeatable plan. I had an idea of what I wanted to do, but I didn't really have a way to get there. It was just an idea. And so I ran into the wall on that. After that company, my next company was successful. I sold it, and Senzing's going to do just great. But anyway, so I guess one example is having a decent plan. What I did when I started Senzing is I got a VC pitch deck. You can go find them out there. Like Guy Kawasaki has one. It's his 10 charts. They're kind of blank. You can fill them in. It's like how to write a pitch deck. And what I did is I wrote a pitch deck to pitch myself. And so I was putting my idea into the charts, and I would get down to the one on competition or go to market, like, well, how are people going to find it? And I'd be like, oh man, my plan's not so good. And I kind of go back to the top. It's kind of like a Rubik's Cube. You know, I get it all like, oh yeah, I got this piece over here. That's going to be great. I'll price it like this. And then you look at the other side of the cube and it's just a mess. And so I went through that over and over through that, building the pitch deck to pitch myself. And that helped me work out any kinks before I started scaling up Senzing. And I think that will have played a role in Senzing's success. Okay, those are all my only ideas on that.
Do you mind talking about what your first startup was?
Oh man, it was a custom software company, just like my second one. People would say, hey, I remember this lady. What's her name? Can't remember. Anyway, she's like, hey, I own 3 shoe stores. Can you write me a multi-location shoe store inventory? Because if somebody comes in and wants to buy this kind of shoe, I want to be able to know if I don't have it in their size, which of my stores has it and is the right size, the right color. and we do transfers between stores, and we sell things, and then some shoes get damaged and some shoes are lost and stolen. And then, we order more shoes, and we need to keep track of all of that in between all these 3 stores. So I designed it and wrote a multi-location shoe store inventory. That's what I did. But what happened is people would tell me about the system they wanted me to write. In my head, I thought I could imagine it. I would tell them some number like, I can write that for $10,000. And then I would work on it for a year and wouldn't finish. But I sold like 20 of these. So I sold like 20 of these, and let's say the total amount I sold 20 systems for was $30,000. But I really needed like 4 million to build these systems. I offered to build an accounting system, a general ledger, accounts payable, accounts receivable, like a whole accounting system. I promised to build somebody for $600. That's crazy. Anyway, so it was trying to like build, you wouldn't try to build a house without like architectural plans. Your house would be crap. No one would be happy. And that's what I was doing, is I wasn't designing what I wanted to build before I build it. So while I was building it, they were telling me it was wrong. It just took me forever because my idea was different than theirs. So it was a really big lesson. I ended up bankrupt, and I lived in my car and homeless at 20. And then started my next company. And that one turned out good because we did blueprints first. If somebody wanted me to build them, if somebody wanted some software, I said, I'm going to write a blueprint first. And if we can agree on the blueprint, then I can tell you exactly how much to build it. And we did that really, really well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, how did you get better at estimating like the amount of time it took to do something? Is it just from experience, or?
Yeah, but then also repeatability. I started finding these common patterns in building these systems. And then I built a standard way to build blueprints. And originally it was in, like a word processor. So it's like a big 100-page document. And then I created some software that would help me make the blueprints faster. Because here's the deal: you'd be talking to the client about the software, and you have all these screens, pictures of screens and pictures of reports, and you're about done, and they go, the word account that we use? I go, yeah. I'd really rather call it ACCTNO. Can you change like account to that and make it not 7 but 9 digits long? You'd be like, oh man, I gotta go respace stuff. I gotta ay. So we made automated software to do that. So you could just change field lengths and change names, and it would reformat everything. Not just like replace, or like a cut and paste replace function, but literally realign everything around it too. Yeah. So anyway, then we got really, really fast at blueprints. And then
blueprints.
Oh man, it was like 85.
There wasn't a lot of software infrastructure like we have today.
No. Yep.
Were you using what were you writing these programs in?
DBase 2, then DBase 3, then Clipper and Fox Pro. It's called a 4GL language. It sits on top of a database. It's just a tightly coupled language that sits on top of a data store. Yeah. And then we grew up and just switched to C. Yeah. And then I quit programming, which I really miss.
Yeah, interesting. Eric,
I'm going to hire a real CEO. I'm going to start programming again. Man, I miss it.
You need to be a technical CEO. All right, so Eric wants to know, what's the story behind the name Senzing?
Okay, I'll tell you. I wanted the name of my company to be called Sense Making. And I found out somebody else owned sensemaking.com. And then I offered to buy it from them for like $30,000. And they said, okay. So I sent the money to an escrow account where they hold it, until the transaction is done, so I don't get robbed. So I send the money, and then they reneged on me. They just said, you know what, we don't want to sell it. And I'm sitting there, I was sitting up in bed in the bedroom, kind of like really bummed that I can't have my company name. And my girlfriend's sitting over working on her laptop right next to me. And she's just quiet over there working. And she goes, hey, I just went on GoDaddy. How about the name Senzing? She goes, it's $9. That's such a better name too. That name's worth $100,000, man. Senzing's such a great name. What you want in a name, this is really important. You want a name that's easy to say. And if you hear it, you can spell it. And you want people to be able to pronounce it right. These companies that have long names that you don't know how to spell, that you can't find when you search them, is the wrong thing. So you want like 1 or 2 syllables, super easy to roll off the tongue. And Senzing does that. And it gives me a lot more freedom of action about what we do. I could sell jewelry if this doesn't pan out. Do you like my necklace line? It's called Senzing.
Yeah.
Like sense making would have really just, I don't know, man, that would have been a bad idea.
I guess it worked out. And that is true. A lot of the big companies have names like Tesla, Google, Facebook, it's like 1 or 2 syllables, as you said.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Yeah.
So what's your background with programming and stuff, and how did you like get motivated, or like what spurred you to start being an entrepreneur specifically? Like I know in like the 1980s, like how many people were really doing like software stuff? Because that was like way back in the day. So
Yeah, it was early. I actually, what was I? I was like in 10, 11. In 10th grade, I took my first computer class on it was like this oldest computer with a cassette drive. Okay. And that summer, as a special project, I wrote a word processor for it. There was not even a word processor. It's not like you could go into Microsoft Word. There's no such thing. So I wrote one. I mean, when you got to the end of the line, it would put the word to the next line. You could, I don't know, man, you could cut and paste some things. So I showed it to my teacher, and the teacher's like, hey, that's pretty good. It really works. And then my teacher came back and said, hey, I have a couple buyers. Can I sell it for you? And I said, sure. So he goes, hey, I just sold 2, and I sold one of them to the Los Angeles School District. I'm like, and it was for, a couple $100. And I'm like, wait a minute, that was totally fun. And people send you money? That's crazy. How's that work? Then I set a bad example, then I decided I didn't need to go to school, and I just figured out myself. That's why I ended up bankrupting my car. I was like, oh, because I really didn't know anything. I wasn't educated. I wrote Hangman and a word processor. I mean, it's got like 7 functions. And then I was like, I'm going to be a programmer. Then I went out and sold a bunch of software for my first company called Preferred Programming Services, and then couldn't finish it because I didn't know anything, and then just face planted. I had to slowly pick myself up. So that's that. And then that company ended up in Vegas, and we built software for the casinos. And we built some software called NORA, Non-Obvious Relationship Awareness. And it's software that would take data from their different systems, like people that make hotel reservations and people that are in the loyalty club that want to keep track of their points so they can get free cars or free meals. And then people they've arrested and card counters. And it would put all this data together and entity resolve it and graph it. And of the 100 things I invented that we built, because we were doing custom software, that had entity resolution in it. And others got interested in it, like the venture capital arm for the CIA called InQtel said, hey, that's pretty cool. Can we give you money? I'm like, wow, that's wild, really? And they said, yeah, we want to take an investment. I'm like, okay. So we took some money from them, and then we took some, that was in 01, and then we took some money in 03 from a couple of others. And then of the 100 things I invented, there was that one thing that turned out to be a really great product, and then IBM bought my company. And so IBM has a product today. They bought from me, and then while I was at IBM, I dreamt up a new way to do it, and that's what Senzing is. Yeah. So that's how Senzing got created. I invented the software inside of IBM with my team. And then IBM let me spin it out. They let me bring my code and the team out of IBM, and Senzing sends them a royalty.
Interesting. Yeah, this like the whole story is pretty crazy. Like you dropped out of high school to start programming at a time when it was so new. I mean,
It was just a hobby. Like it's all I wanted to do every minute of every day. Like I didn't have weekends. Like it's all I did most of my life. It's just like, oh, this is so great.
yeah.
Sleep programming. I wake up there. I just keep programming. I sleep on the floor, eat dry top ramen noodles without cooking them because it takes too long to cook because I just want to program.
Yeah.
Yep.
Was it easy to like self-learn things back in those days? Like now, like there's like online courses and stuff, but like how did you learn programming outside of like class?
Just the book and being curious, just trying things and failing and trying things and failing.
Sure.
Yeah. Yep. I'm not sure I'd recommend it for everybody. It was a pretty long haul to be, bankrupt living in your car at 20.
Yeah.
I spent most of my life just so broke, man. I was like borrowing a couple grand from my kid's friend's carpenter dad, like a $2,000. I remember putting $2 of gas in my tank. That didn't fill it up. I mean, $2 of gas, which is because all you have is quarters, so you can drive around for 2 more days. So I spent most of my life just really broke, but I just kept working on it because I like software so much. And like user interface design a lot, which is I think really cool. It's not something that I'm great at, and others in the IT field, like others, really like performance optimization and like to figure out how to make things super, super fast. Like that's what's exciting for them. It's such a huge field, there's like so much interesting stuff in it. Yeah.
For sure.
One of those I saw your questions beforehand, and it just remind right there, I just thought of one of the future questions about one of the future things is there's a lot of brittleness in machine learning models. This has to do with my fantasy analytics blog post. Is a real art is to figure out what other data to add to a system so that it has a sufficient amount of data to make high quality predictions, or that you can drive high quality analytics out of it. And often I see people working harder and harder and harder on the math where they can't close the gap. There's not enough. You can't squeeze knowledge out of a pixel. Like it doesn't matter how good the math is. If your pixel is a red dot, you can use all the math in the world and you won't know if it's a picture of the sun or a picture from the fireplace. It's just a red pixel. So you got to get those surrounding data context. And there's a bit of an art to that, but I think it's not fully appreciated. And the importance of widening observation spaces. And so when I know I'm onto something, I'll be talking to some, I forget if I was talking to a government or a big bank or somebody, and they're working on a hard problem. Like, how are we going to detect blank? And I'm like, And I go, oh yeah. And they were trying to detect bad people trying to sneak in, say to the bank. And I said, oh yeah, if you had that kind of data. And they go, why would we want that kind of data? And I go, well, that's exactly what the people trying to sneak in would be. Why would you want that kind of data? But if you had that, it works like glue. That data will help you figure out that's not 2 people, that's 1. And then, so that was an example of helping them widen their observation space. Another example of that that's really more specific is I get asked from time to time about what data would you look at if you wanted computers to detect emerging technology trends, right? Yeah, you could look at Twitter, sure. You could look at Wikipedia. You could look at like tech journals, patents. But what if you wanted to find it really early, like right the very beginning, like almost before there's even patents, And so one of the ones that I have thought of and shared with people, these people that are talking about this, is go to Wikipedia, but not for the main page, but the edit page. when a Wikipedia page shows up with a new tech, behind it, how many people are editing it? Is it one person talking a lot? Or is it a really big conversation in the number of people that are talking about it? And so that's a very subtle example of widening an observation space.
How do you figure out these metrics to expand an observation space? Is it just from experience, like intuition, or?
Yeah, I commented on that briefly in my fantasy analytics blog post. I gave a few tips on how do you kick a pile of data to get an idea if it's any good or not, like without having to do a lot of work. I would just refer you to that. Whatever I said there would be more thoughtful than what would come out of my mouth right now.
Sure. And then going on to like what you said earlier about the pixel, I think that's a great example of how like a data set can be too small to extrapolate from. But there are like some machine learning models that are able to extrapolate from data sets like much better than humans can. So how can you say for like some are kind of obvious, but how can you say for sure that some data sets aren't providing enough information?
Well, the way for sure is to have a truth set to then compare it to see what your accuracy is. And if you don't have a truth set, then you can do a sample audit, like in the voter thing. You know, it's like you actually look at each individual record and at times call people. So those are the ways to be really sure. And there's a difference between being accurate about how to fill in missing values on rows versus missing averages. Like you might be able to, it's one kind of algorithm that would tell you, if you didn't have gender in a data set, there might be one kind of algorithm that would tell you it's about, 52% male. But it's a different algorithm maybe that would tell you each record accurately what gender is that record. This reminds me about big data, like things that are rare that happen once in a million. It's like rare events. A lot of people write algorithms to go, let's find the stuff that's rare. The problem is in big data, things that are rare happen 1 million times a day. Like how often do we all hang out, right? It's happened so much. So your bigger your data gets, just statistical anomaly and outlier does not mean that it is the thing you were looking for. I did some maritime work and they're like, oh, this is so rare. This big boat is just going in circles. Why would it go in circles, huh? Why? There was somebody on the boat that was so sick, and if the boat sits still, it rocks. And then more people get sick. And I was waiting for a helicopter to take the person off to the hospital. So it motored in a big circle to keep the boat stable. I'm glad they didn't send a torpedo in. Hey, that never happens. Shoot, fire.
Extrapolating from data can only get you so far, especially like in new circumstances, like the world is changing, it doesn't know what it doesn't know. So like for example, like you've like in Senzing, like one thing that you guys do is like program in like some common sense principles. In the future, do you plan to keep having them like hard coded by like humans, or like kind of inferred by machines as well?
I think I could have machines develop the principles, but if I did that right now, it would be an academic exercise because it takes so little effort and time to do the way we did it. But at some point, if I had extra resources, would I have a machine explore constructing the principles? Sure, we could have done that, but it would have just been an extra project. That one was just too quick and easy to just let a human do. Yeah, I do think about that. You also had a question there about like when Senzing learns, does it has a little local inner loop, but does any data flow back to Senzing? And the answer is no, we don't have any. There's no phone home. No data flows back to Senzing. If our partner or customer calls us or, shares with us a certain situation like, hey, blah, 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 doesn't seem right. We're like, oh, that's a good idea. So, we take feedback about what's happening in the field and then make our algorithms better. But that's very controlled and manual.
Yeah, privacy by design, right? So, I mean, like ideally, if it was learning from all the different sources where it was deployed, I think maybe it would become more knowledgeable over time. But then you have to balance that with not collecting user data. So,
Right. We're kind of excited to not have anybody's data. Yeah. We don't want to have a situation where somebody steals the data and then we have to apologize to the world that somebody stole the data. So it makes us feel safe not to have it.
how does the system learn over time?
It learns about statistics over time, and then it uses new emerging statistics to think better for the future and fix the past. It does entity-centric learning, so over time you might learn somebody's middle name, or maybe a nickname that has nothing to do with their name. Maybe their name's like Randy Thomas Alves, and then, but their friends call him Ricky. Over time, you might learn that they also have that nickname, and that the moment that you learn that, you want to go back and reevaluate the past to see if you can improve any decisions. My brother's name is Rody, R-O-D-Y, but some people mishear it and hear the word Rudy. So early in a system that's not smart, it might think that there's a Rudy and a Rody that live at the same address. But then over time, as it learns new data, it goes, oh, sometimes Rody is, people spell it Rudy. There's only one person at that house. Then they snap together. And then years later, when he has a little kid named Rody Jr., it has to learn there's actually a second human in that house. So anyway, the learning comes from real-time statistics and real-time emerging context and learning variability, different ways to spell things. Those are two.
Learning is all on the local machine.
Yeah. Another type of learning is the sequence neutrality thing. It says, what did you learn first? Did you learn record A first, then B, then C? Or did you learn record C first, then B, then A? It's monotonic reasoning, you could call it, or it's commutative if you talk mathy terms. Imagine that you get record 1,000,000,001. You have to say, had I known this first, over the billion decisions I've made, would I have made any different? So using new observations to reverse earlier assertions in real time is not trivial. It's very hard to do. And it's a style of, does learning allow you, do things you learn allow you to reassess earlier decisions? Yeah, that's a tricky thing to do.
For sure.
Yeah.
And one thing that I wanted to also ask about was you dropped out of high school, so I'm assuming that you're largely self-taught. If so, like how did you learn a lot of the stuff you know now?
I worked on specific projects, like I worked on the multi-location shoe store inventory. And then the city of Fresno had an airport, and this lady wanted me to write a profitability system to track the profitability of the airport, because you have all those outlets in there and stores. And then Sun Made Raisins back in the day wanted software to track the yield on the crop, like raisins lose weight as you suck the water out of them. And they wanted to see how the yield changed by crop and type of raisin. And so each one of those, I would sit with an expert, be curious, and they would teach me, all these things. And I would learn really narrow things. And then what happened over time is I started seeing patterns across. So it started making it faster and faster to go cross-discipline. But in the last 5 years, I don't know, maybe 7, I spent 2,000 hours studying anti-money laundering with a big global bank. I spent 500 hours with Singapore and helping think about maritime awareness, like recognizing risk in the Malacca Strait, which is half the world's oil supply and a third of the world's commodities go through there. That's fun. I like deep diving into things. I don't like the superficial, learn a few things. I like to dive deep and interview the people doing the work and show me your spreadsheet, with your yield math for raisins.
Sure. Yeah, finding experts is great. One thing that one of my teachers told me is to talk to the expert's expert. So, yeah.
Oh, interesting. That's very cool. That's pretty wise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was like, you ask them for who they think is the expert, and you ask, and then you just keep going, and eventually you'll end up in a very interesting place.
Yeah. You'll end up in really the elites that know something, right? You get to a very, very small number of people. Almost in every, yeah, you'd like less than 10 on most topics, I'll bet. Have you done that?
I have not. One thing he also recommended was do a deep dive into the topic first, so that you prepare some educated questions. So
That's good because it tells them that you care about the topic.
yeah,
And it's fun for the guru on the topic to have to answer a question like, you know, how does solar power work? You know, photovoltaic cell or whatever. They're like, oh, this is me forever.
for sure.